Okay, gang. What I would like to do is just in a fairly informal way, but I would just like to hear a little bit from each group. So if someone from each group could, you have to stay with your group for a moment longer. If someone from each group can tell us about some of the themes of what you discussed, just summarize for me a bit what came up in your discussion. I'm going to start with this group right here. Anyone? Come on, volunteers. I'm giving you your autonomy. I want someone to summarize for me what you all talked about. Just a few points. Just bring out.
Did we all have different stories?
Yes, you all had different cases.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about, and try to project if you can.
Okay. Ours was about the built-down hoax, which was about a skull that was supposed to prove something about the human evolution. And it turns out the entire thing was falsified, and it was not checked out at all by any peers at the time, and it was only disputed once they found conflicting archaeological evidence elsewhere in the world.
So who's got, one of you have the questions that came with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, could you highlight for us what were just share some of the questions.
Okay, well, I mean, the one that we talked, I think, about the most was, why do you think Charles Dawson, who was the guy who discovered this skull, forged the discovery of the built-down skull? And we talked a long time about this because we don't really know what his circumstances was. One easy question was, did anyone in this case exhibit a lack of integrity?
You decided, yeah.
and then we also discussed where, how he basically violated every point of doctrine of double effect. So.
Well, that's a pretty harsh condemnation. Did you have any reflections on, how you could imagine ever getting into that situation? Is there any way for you to imagine pressures that would bring you to do something like that, or it's just too?
Well, we talked about that he might have family issues. Maybe he needed to have some money for his children, or maybe it was something egotistical because he did make the discovery close to his death, and he died a couple years later. So maybe he wanted something. He wanted to fulfill his life or something. Make some kind of scientific discovery,
He wanted a legacy, even if it was a false one.
Yeah.
Did you want to add a point from your?
Just that we had talked a little bit about what might have happened.
So you can imagine it, but yeah, go ahead. What are your takeaways?
To prove something that the community thought and just assumed was true, and maybe he went ahead and did falsify this evidence and close to his death, thinking that he'd never be caught because it would eventually, everything that he was saying would eventually be proven later.
Well, that's important because one of the easiest rationalizations for us to make is that it does no harm because in the end the conclusions people are going to draw are the right conclusions. So if I have to falsify to get them where they ought to be anyway, that's okay. I'm doing the right thing. In the end, the right bit of knowledge gets out there, even if I had to twist a little. You actually hear that a lot in various kinds of fraud, but historians, psychologists, hard sciences, there's various ways you can twist it to say to yourself, well, but what really matters is that they get the truth at the end, and I'm just leading them to the truth in my own way. But of course, we know if the method is corrupt, it will potentially even throw into question the truth, and it'll take longer then for people to accept what you wanted them to accept anyway. So here we are back with consequences versus principles. Let's hear from this group. A quick summary of what your case was, and then just some reflections of what came out of your discussion. And just be sure to kind of project so the other groups can hear you.
Yeah.
Our case was about a scientist who pretty much lied, or he put out tons of papers saying that he discovered something with transistors, and it was all made up data.
Yeah. So
Do you want his name?
Yeah.
Dr.
Sean.
Sean.
Yeah.
The dude published a paper every 8 days, and he didn't keep laboratory notebooks. And when they went to go like double check his data. They couldn't reproduce it, and then he said that he, quote, didn't have enough space on his hard drive to store the data, so he just didn't store it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the old "I didn't have enough room on my hard drive to store the data" excuse. What kind of things did you talk about in your discussion of the questions?
One of our questions was, did his fabricated research cause any potential victims?
Victims, right.
And if so, who are the victims?
Mhm.
And we said it would be the credibility of the company he worked for.
Which is one of the baby bells, right? Lucent or something?
That's right.
Yeah.
Bell
Yeah.
Labs.
Yeah. So the one victim is the credibility of his company. Any other victims?
The journals that publish his work. That was fake.
Makes you wonder, though, about the process that would allow that to happen without.
Yeah, that was another question. It's like, what factors do you think led him to make up his data?
Did you guys come to any guesses on that, or?
Well, he was a young scientist apparently at the time. It was like 4 years 4 years since he got his Ph.D. So we're thinking that he wanted to be a famous scientist.
So look at what we've got here. We have this guy's near death, and yours is at the beginning of his career, and they both wanted to be famous or wanted to leave something, a legacy, and falsified to get there. Yeah.
We also came up with another thought that was similar to one that they sort of generated, is that he, maybe was really, really believed in his theory but just couldn't prove it, and so had this idea that if I falsify this data now and people believe it, then I'll get all this funding, I'll get all this success, and then I can eventually prove it for real, but I need the money first. It's just a possibility among many.
Well, and I think it's really important to raise that. Go ahead. Yeah.
He ended up betraying himself and his belief in his research by veering away from the stuff that he wanted to do and going instead into the whole money collection and stuff like that. Because if you really truly care about what you're doing, then you'll take the minor failures and let them lead you onto the correct path for eventual success. Because not everything's going to work in research. And it's okay to fail, especially if you publish that result and people tell you, oh, I know why that failed. And then because you told people about that failure, they tell you how you can possibly get success. So failures are as important as success in research. And
Yeah.
he didn't accept that.
Well, and we have a culture that doesn't celebrate failure and doesn't have much patience for it, and that's unfortunate because it is a step towards ultimate success, as you pointed out. And I'm drawn back to this point that both groups have now made too, that it is a kind of a conceit and arrogance that you can fall into, that what I have to say is so important that it's worth falsifying the data to get people to see this. And of course, as we say, there are victims, and it also is ultimately derailing this path towards what you said you cared about, what you thought was important. So I keep coming back to my Aristotelian points about habits, but you're sure creating some pretty bad habits of character when you do that, that will make it harder and harder for you to ever get to that dream that you once had of being this esteemed researcher that people remember, not for the cases of fraud that are discussed as case studies, but for actually having advanced your field. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, speaking of failure, just reminded me of the time I went on tour at Xerox, great corporation, and they had this guy there that was involved in developing special invisible into security credit and stuff. Was all over my head. But the first thing he talked to us about wasn't security credit, it was about failure. And he said, you learn so much more than your failure. If you do something that works, what have you learned? It works. That's it. So it's just a relief to me. It's because like, okay, so if I actually try and do something new, I'm not going to be unproven. Like failure, which just means I'm going to learn a lot more than I thought I would. So,
Well, yes, and I think perhaps ideally we would even get away from that word maybe, because even if you label it failure, that's not really the right way, and we all do it, and we all use that word. But really, it's trial and error, and error is a little less damning than failure, and you have to make a certain number of these errors and record them, or to make the progress. And yeah, we have to remind ourselves of that because, you know, you wouldn't be here if you weren't smart and successful and you had, you know, ambition, and that's the kind of person who doesn't like to do anything that might get labeled failure. But without those errors, the trials can't go forward. Okay, this back group. Who's? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot there were three. Okay, so middle group here. Who is your spokesperson?
Okay, well, I guess I've been voting.
I think you have, yes. It happens like that usually, by default.
So we had the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, some of you may be familiar with this. They did a study over 40 years. It started before there was a cure for syphilis and studying the progression of the disease. And so they had 399 mostly illiterate African Americans to participate in this study. They provide some like treatment for the hospital and studying the disease. They tried some treatments which were mostly toxic and mercury and stuff like that. There was no cure for syphilis at the time. Then in 1942, there was penicillin was accepted as being a cure for syphilis, but this study continued on, and the patients were refused. They were denied access to information about the fact that there was a cure. Some of them had been gone to the army and were told that they had syphilis and were told to get treatment for it with penicillin, but the researchers in the study told them that they couldn't and refused to let them get treatment. Part of the study involved allowing the patients to die so that their bodies could be autopsied to perform the research study.
Well, so what did y'all think of that?
Well, we all agreed that, especially after penicillin had come into play, that, you know, we talked about why didn't they stop, why did they continue the study? And one of the problems was, too, that the National Health encouraged them. You know, one of the research scientists brought up the question of, you know, about the moral and ethics of this, and the National Health Department said, no, keep going with this research. And so it did kept going until finally someone, you know, went later on, went back to them and said, you know, look, I don't think this is ethical. And then finally he leaked it to the news, and then it was on the front page of the New York Times the next day, and that put a halt to it.
You know, it's a little simplistic, but it doesn't hurt. I used to hear the military folks talking about the Washington Post test, but you could have the New York Times test. But if what you're doing would be a problem if it appeared on the front page of the Times or the Post, then you're probably doing something wrong. And that's a big clue. But you know, this is a case where when we look at it, I mean, your reaction is the same one I or most people have, which is, you know, oh my goodness, this is just on the face of it so obviously, well, it is obviously wrong. Even if you dig a little deeper, it still is wrong. But what's interesting is how many people were involved with it, and nobody, until it was leaked to the press, nobody put a stop to it. So you have to ask yourself, just as we did with the Milgram case or any of the others that we've discussed, you know, how did it get to this point? How did people let it go this far? Why wasn't anyone's conscience engaged to the degree where they would put a stop to it? It's a really good reminder and a warning that we are capable of doing this. I mean, if you met the people involved in this, I don't think you'd meet them and go instantly, oh, that's a monster. You know, these are, unfortunately, ordinary people who did this. Yes?
Well, I just thought it was amazing that it seemed like the entire national, or
Yeah,
the medical community was in on this. And they have a quote from, and this was in 1972 as like they were being investigated. The director of the Public Health Services Division of Venereal Diseases said the men's status did not warrant ethical debate. They were subjects, not patients. Clinical material, not sick people.
wow.
And that was like, it seems like that was representative of the broad opinion of the whole thing throughout the National Health Service.
And let me just add a word to our dialogue here that you can take away with dehumanization. If you are working with human subjects, please avoid that, but you know, please look out for the fact that it is almost never going to lead to a good result if you dehumanize the people you're working with and to think of them only as numbers and forget that they are beings with autonomy, with free will, and deserving of dignity and respect, as we've touched on in our other discussions. Now, I want to apologize. I know a couple of you wanted to weigh in, but I want to make sure we at least hear from all the groups, and then if we can all talk about any of the cases, that'll be great. So let me just hear from the other two groups first. Are there two left? One here and one in the back? Okay, let's go here and then the last group. Okay. And from the diaphragm project.
This was about a researcher who faked evidence of human cloning in South Korea, and there's him and 9 other people, and the evidence, it wasn't discovered that the evidence was fake until about 2 years later. And so one of the questions that was whether there were any victims of this, and we thought that there certainly were, because one of the effects of this was that a lot of the funding for other clinics around the world was cut, because they thought these breakthroughs had already been achieved in cloning. And so a lot of important work was essentially delayed for 2 years around the world while people were figuring out that this was fake.
And I bet, we are speculating here. It's not like I have access to his brain, but I bet he did not consider that in his reflections. It wasn't among his calculations that this could be an effect. And this is that tunnel vision that we talked about this morning, but it is so easy to lose sight of how your actions affect other people. But when we're talking about something of this scope, you really are, once you violate your principles, you really are throwing yourself to the luck of the world as to what those consequences might end up ultimately being. And they could be very far-reaching and very, very negative and harmful. Any other thoughts from your discussion that you'd like to bring out or highlight?
We talked about with the other researchers who had falsified data. One was at the end of their life, and that was kind of their motivation. One was at the beginning. This researcher was from South Korea, and they were saying that maybe one of his motivations was to bring South Korea more respect and more attention in the scientific community. And so it's been a very unfortunate consequence that was lost, or lost their respect, and then it was more difficult or very frustrating for other scientists in the country.
So the very thing he was trying to achieve, back to these, if you reason only from consequences and you don't have some, say, Kantian side constraints working there, then you end up possibly opening yourself up to the very thing that you were trying to avoid or trying to combat. Yes, ma'am.
Also, there was a U.S. scientist who co-authored the article, and he actually hadn't performed any of the experiments, and he just kind of signed on to it. So that was very questionable as to whether he just wanted to be published with it, or even though it's falsified.
But certainly some kind of negligence or laziness at the core, which is great for you to point out, because what you're bringing us back to is character. There was a character flaw in the other scientists too. Maybe, what the different reasons why they did it, but it comes down to character. I'm glad you brought that out. Okay, last group. Who is your spokesperson?
Ours is the Milgram, and
Well, at least we all know the Milgram experiments now.
yeah, we kind of taught us most about like the consequences and the victims and stuff. We're kind of debating back and forth between whether like if they're like in the experiment and they did it, like they're choosing to do it anyway, so whatever harmful effects it's kind of like part of them. But then also like, is it right for them to put them in that situation? I couldn't really decide.
I find that case really intriguing when you look at it from this angle, because here I am, an ethicist, using the results of the Milgram experiment because I find them helpful in analyzing some aspects of human behavior. But should I, if the experiment itself was unethical because of how the subjects of this experiment were tricked into doing what they did? Very interesting question. Did you guys come to a consensus on that? Do you think it should, it's just the bald question, do you think he should have done the experiment or not, given that we know what came out of it?
Well, why couldn't he get there? Like, aren't psych experiments still going to like tell you, like they'll tell you if there's going to be risks, but they don't tell you like what it is necessarily, what they're studying.
Yeah, the rules for human subjects research have certainly been refined since Milgram's day, But you still can do research, particularly psychological research, where you don't disclose everything, because otherwise you really couldn't learn any of these crucial points about human nature. So I think it's a question of degree. You know, how much did he fool them? How little did they know going in? And how much could you still have told them without revealing the punchline, as it were, and having it done? And, you know, I think those degrees do matter if we are trying to show respect for the subjects. Any other thoughts that came out of your discussion just more generally that you'd like to share, any of you? No. Oh. It made you uncomfortable. Can you identify why? Not sure. All right, well, we're almost out of time here. I wanted to just put this quote up here for you about integrity. I'm just very fond of this one from Francis Bacon. It's not what we eat, but what we digest that makes us strong. Not what we gain, but what we save that makes us rich. And not what we read, but what we remember that makes us learned. And not what we profess, but what we practice that gives us integrity. So that concept of integrity, of having consistency between the values you say you believe in and the actions that proceed and either do or do not reflect those values, is a very important piece of leading an ethical life, and of course, therefore, being an ethical researcher. Before I let you go, I did want to draw your attention. I know some of you have picked them up. Some of you use them as fans, which I don't blame you for. It did get toasty in here. We'll have to look into what's going on with that. But there are various notices on your chairs about a big event we have coming up in September, which I invite you all to, and I hope you will join us. Mary Robinson, who is a tireless international champion for human rights, also the former president of Ireland, the first woman president of Ireland, incidentally, and a member of Nelson Mandela's The Elders, which is a group of 12 high-profile international figures who are committed to trying to help the world show some moral progress in the area of human rights. She will be here to receive the Inamori Ethics Prize on, where's the one with the date? Here we go. On 9/9/09, on September 9th in Severance Hall. So it's free and open to the public. Please come, please bring your friends. We'd love to see you. And more generally, I hope that now that you've been here and experienced this workshop, that you will recognize that first of all, that the Inamori Center exists, and second, that it is here for you as a resource. We have a lot of programs. Please keep an eye out for other things that we do. We have a student organization that comes out of the center called GELS, which is the Global Ethical Leaders Society. It is an elite organization in that you do have to apply for it. We could not take all comers because it's kind of a neat deal. Our members of GELS are committed to being responsible global citizens and working on their own development as ethical leaders, and the center helps fund them for experiential learning opportunities that will help enhance that. So they bring proposals to us, and we fund experiential learning that's outside of the classroom. And not for credit experiences that you really can't get funded anywhere else. We're a source for that. So if you're interested in GELS, please come by the center sometime and speak to, in the front desk there, you'll find either Christian or Nicole. They can help you out. And also we have, of course, a website. Who doesn't? So you can check out the center website for more information about our events. And again, if you didn't pick it up at the beginning, my name is Shannon French, Dr. Shannon French. And I would love to be a resource for you too. So if you have questions about ethics and I can help you, that is why we are here. And I really enjoyed this today, and I liked the lively discussion. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's comments and questions, especially running out of time here at the end. But hopefully you can take some of those and have more conversations with your colleagues and friends and continue this going forward. So thank you, and have a great rest of the day and a great weekend.